Good morning, everybody, and welcome to the next EMA webinar. I'm still trying to multitask here, now letting people in. Objective of today's webinar is to review the work that we've done to date, or I say we, Chris, Anna, Mark, and their teams have done to date on the review of what we're going to call Back to Live. Which is basically a working document or documents. I do need a co-host, sorry. But before we start on that, I also want to talk about yesterday we released our statement, EMA statement on Black Lives Matter, and we've discussed this at length at the council and in the leaders forum, and agreed that not only should we communicate our position as an association on the issue, or what I want to call it, but the situation. But we want to go further than that, and we want to look at ways we can affect and drive change within our industry to support young people from the Bain community in getting into the events industry. And Donna Appleby of London and Partners is heading up a working team on that. And so if anybody's interested in joining that, please let me know. We'll make the introduction to Donna. Drop me an email or something, and we'll take it from there. If I can ask everybody to be on mute whilst we're doing the webinar, except of course the presenters. And if you want to say something, or you want to come in, wave a hand, give me a wave if you're on, or send a message. That would be great. And if we can use the chat space for comments, not the Q&A, because then we capture it all in one place. So very much the idea of this is it's kind of a working group. We're going to take you through what we're thinking, where we are on stuff, the advice that we're sharing. And we are looking for people to give us some input, give us some feedback. If we missed any big gaping holes, let us know. We'll be taking these documents to the industry on the 2nd of July. So the end of this week, we're going to share them with some people. And then we're having a webinar on the 2nd of July where we have an open forum discussion with a couple of hotels and a couple of agencies, just to see how they see all of this rolling out and just sort of getting it out there, really. The documents that you'll see today and that we will share are guidance, all right? They're ideas. It's a collaboration of ideas from within the corporates that we're sharing. These are not official. Any government guidelines that are released will override any of our guidelines. We'll then update our documents and everything else. But the idea is a collaborative approach to give people a quicker, more efficient way of, returning to live and working together, because, this has taken these guys over a couple of weeks putting together the information and everything else. So why should all of us do that? Let's work on it together. So again, anybody got anything, ideas that we think we're missing, please let us have them so we can fold them in. Yeah, so Anna has worked on pre-event. Mark has worked on suppliers and venue, and Christopher has worked on the on-site bit. Christopher, you've headed the group up all together, so do you want to do a quick kick-off before we go in?
Yeah, thank you for that, Richard. So as Richard said, I've been working with Mark and Anna. We've been working on these, and we've been making some assumptions as we've been working. So we've very much kicked off during this great unknown before we got much direction. The things that we've been assuming, so there's going to be overnight accommodation, people are going to be able to travel there, and the social distancing measures will be reducing at some point. The timeline, we're looking at getting something out as a pre-read to the industry on the 29th of June, with a discussion taking place from the 2nd of July. So that's the timeline. What we'll do, we'll go through the lists that we've put together, If anybody's got anything, if they could use the Q&A, if they've got anything pressing.
Chat space, Chris.
Sorry, the chat space, if there's anything pressing. Otherwise, we'll be having a discussion afterwards. If I could hand over to Anna, first of all, and Anna will run through the pre-event work. Richard, would you like to share the lists via the screens for Anna?
I think I've done that, have I? Or can you see that?
No, I can't see it, but I've got it up on my
All right, I'm coming up. I'm coming up. I'll work out which one it is now. Pre-event. There we go. There you go. Is that up?
Yeah. Mm-hmm.
Lovely. Hi, everyone. Good morning. I'm familiar names here. Shout out to Tom Hurley, who is my line manager. So no pressure here, but he is as a little surprise. And Sarah Farman, Sarah, who I used to work with at Alanovi back in the day. So yeah, it's good to see some familiar faces, or not faces, especially not mine this morning. But I will head straight into the pre-event planning. So as Christopher and Richard already said, this has been a few weeks in the making, and attending a lot of meetings and industry calls and video calls and getting our thoughts and actions together. So whilst this isn't completely everything, there will be probably some gaps that you might see or things that we haven't thought of. So by all means, let us know, but we've tried to cover as much as possible that we think is relevant for most people as well. I think for this document, the first few bullet points, I'll probably talk in a little bit more detail, and then go over the rest of the stuff as well. I think from the outset, looking at business models and preparing for new ways of working is something that we will probably consider at Liberty and our wider team at Virgin Media as well. And the events that maybe you have done in the past, they're just not going to be cookie cutter, you might not be able to do them the same again. So I think what might have worked, you might have to reconsider whether you're going to do that event exactly the same. Do you even do that event again, or is it going to become a hybrid event? So I think before we even start anything going back to live events, we have to look at the business models and see how we're going to do our events again. Health and safety is absolutely going to be on everyone's mind. And I think sometimes in the past, it might even have taken a back seat because people are so concerned about the content or the venues that they were going to, and health and safety in this doesn't always get the consideration that it needs. So I think the first thing that business leaders are going to want to talk to us about before we can even deliver them. They will also look at us as the event professionals to show that we've done our diligence on the event, because if we can't safeguard our employees, if we can't safeguard delegates, then there's absolutely no point in having the event go ahead. And then I would consider putting internal policies together. It's something that we are working on at Liberty and Virgin Media, and this is absolutely going to be our Bible. And I think we will have a bigger policy, which will be quite a few pages long, that will cover every little thing. And then we will put together a smaller checklist, which goes on to this next point, that you can just use as a quick rundown and a run through for all of your events, that's specific to your events and the type of events that you do, just so you know you've covered everything in the planning and prep for that event. We work to a specific preferred venue agency, so I will make sure that we go out to them and that they know in advance, before they approach any venues, or at least even before we get to contract stage, exactly what our new protocols are before we can do anything. Any suppliers that you work with, we're going to have to know this. So it's making sure that we're transparent on everything, and that venues know ahead of time what it is in case it just doesn't fit with what they're doing. Check your risk assessments and your liability insurance of your company as well, because that might vary across the board. And also your CSR policy of the venue. I feel very strongly about this. I don't think sustainability should take a back seat. We still need to be very conscious and very aware. And 6 months ago, this was such a huge subject matter. So this absolutely shouldn't be overlooked or sacrificed purely for health and safety as well. It should be a strong consideration. So GDPR is something we are still waiting to hear on. There's been nothing that has come out so far that we've seen officially in government guidelines. So we're going to have to keep checking up on that and keeping an eye on what's current, because I think that's going to move pretty quickly when it does. But finding out what information we're allowed to collect prior to registration for an event. Our local HR or people teams will need to ensure there's compliance for the business as well. The things like, are we allowed to take temperature checks? What sort of information are we allowed to gather in advance of the event that doesn't breach GDPR guidelines? So that's going to be high on our agenda before we do anything. And also what we're allowed to keep a record of. Event survey is something that we had discussed in our wider events team. And basically looking to ask people in advance, would they consider coming to an event? What would stop them from coming to the event? You know, letting them know the event is going to take place on this date at this time. This is the location it's going to be. We deem it safe. We wouldn't be running the event if we didn't think it was appropriate to run the event. So what would be your reasons for not attending? And then would we offer a hybrid event as a matter of course? Or will we actually take a vote and say to people who want to run this event, would you prefer it was virtual versus live attendance? My guess is that by the time that we think it's safe enough to actually do a live event, that people won't be as concerned because they would have already lived through this and already be living their normal, in commas, everyday lives. So I think by the time we get back to live events, most people will deem that it's safe enough to do so. We would need to ask delegates in the pre-event survey if they've had any symptoms, if they've been self-isolating, have they been to any countries that may pose a risk or have got higher levels of COVID-19 at that point. And then I think we also need to build on the company's privacy and data policy protection as well as statement, as we've got bullet pointed in that. Again, this is all just guidance, as Richard said. So you will know what to do that's best for your events and for your organisation. There's also the mandatory temperature scanning for attendees on arrival. So we might need a written commitment from the venue that they're going to do that. And then we might also need some sort of register, a wellness register, or even a waiver, just so that people know that they're going to have that and that they're okay with signing that and having that done as soon as they walk into the venue. Instructions, if you usually do join instructions, we'll have to cover a lot about this situation. So I think there's something to be said about reassurance, how we're going to safeguard employees, what steps we've taken on site. There's an expectation about their behaviour as well. So making sure that they stick to the guidelines, if there's one-way or two-way traffic, or if there's entrances that you go in and some that you only, you come out of, making sure that they stick to all of those guidelines. Letting them know in advance all the protocols and the steps that we've put in place around food service and on-site staff support, cloakroom, all of that. Private transportation, all of the safety guidelines should be communicated to all delegates 24 hours prior to the event, and we would expect to get that from venues as well. There's the legal considerations. If you don't have in-house to a legal team, I would question what external advice or support do you have access to, and to look into that now. There's no point in waiting until you have to start signing contracts or you have to start meeting the terms and conditions. Force majeure is going to be expanded, we know that. It is unlikely to cover pandemics, just like event insurance is unlikely to cover pandemics, purely because they would be paying out so much. So there's going to be a lot of red tape, I think, that we will have to go through. But likewise, I think there will be venues that will want to work with organisers and want to work with companies because they don't want to have to go through this again, and they might even be more likely to be more flexible. So it's really having an understanding of your contracts, your terms and conditions, your crisis management. What would happen if a venue closes down a week before you're due to have your event, for example? I think it's going to be a very different set of circumstances where a lot of us were pulling the plug on events in February and early March before we went into lockdown. I think the circumstances might be the other way around, that we're unlikely to pull the plug because we're going to be better prepared and we wouldn't be considering a live event. But it is what if happens if a venue does have a case of COVID. And also, how would we communicate that to our employees or to the delegates that you have attending? There's a lot of agenda and budget considerations that we need to think of. So the start and end times of events ideally wouldn't be scheduled during rush hour at the venues or having staggered timings for people arriving, particularly if you've got coach loads or bus loads of people coming in. And if people are not comfortable to travel at all, particularly in public transport, would you consider a live link, which takes us back to the hybrid event? There needs to be considerations for budget, for AV and making sure there's suitable AV at the venue, because if they can't deliver what you want in order to deliver the hybrid event, then it won't be the venue for you. An additional cost for exclusive use of venue or areas within the venue. So you might not want to have a shared foyer area for your, having your tea and your biscuits and in your morning break. You might want to only do exclusive use so you can at least know that you've safeguarded your employees. So all of those come with an additional price point. So that's that extra time that you need to, extra cost you need to factor in. And also the time for delegate management and getting people around the venue for breaks, lunch, etc. On-site considerations as well. Recording attendance for attendees and keeping that for a certain amount of time. If there was anything that should happen post-event, it's making sure you've got an accurate list of attendees. Identify who the first aiders are and whether you're likely to have a wellness room on site, I think will be really important. And making sure that you can safely remove somebody off site and getting them to a place of safety, whether that is a local hotel room or whether the onus is on the business to provide transport for them to actually get back to their preferred residence if they do fall ill. Internally, we are looking at having maybe an emergency kit that would consist of small bottles of hand sanitizer, pens, mints. I found out there is a pen that is antibacterial, for example, and it is antibacterial for the entire time that you use the pen. So something like that could be a consideration. You could do individual kits for people when they arrive. Reviewing meeting space capacities, looking at larger spaces than you would normally consider, in case we're still on the 1 meter rule at that point. Again, that's another budget consideration. If you have a venue that would normally have could host 100 people, then you might only have 50 to 75. Banners and signage, I think, are going to be key, not only from the venue, but maybe also familiarisation about the banners and the signage that you've got in your own offices. So people have that familiarity when they're walking on the venues as well. Then there's high touch areas, making sure that the venues would take those things out. So magazines or books in hotel rooms, anything that is an actual touchpad or keypad, menus, anything like that is really consideration for venues and having those discussions with them as well. Badging options, should people print their own badges in advance? If it's internal staff with their own IDs for events. Hand sanitizer stations, I think that's going to be the norm. You only need to go to the shops now and you see all of that, so people are going to be used to that. High traffic areas, particularly making sure you've got enough and there isn't a queue for the sanitizer stations. And the rest of the stuff again is what I spoke about previously. So two-way traffic, in and out entrances, making sure you don't have bottlenecks anywhere. On-site testing, if anyone does fail an on-site temperature test, what are you going to do with them, where are you going to place them? And preferred suppliers as well. So there is a high chance that venues will only want you to use their preferred suppliers, because if they're going through stringent measures and testing their all external suppliers, and then if they're not allowed on the venue or can't be part of the PSL unless they've been tested, there's a good chance you won't be able to bring in your preferred AV supplier. You have to use the ones for the venue. So it's asking those questions in advance of the event before you actually book with the venue. And again, consideration for any other external venues that you, vendors that you use, so whether it's caterers, theme company, florists, entertainment, etc. So just in summary, I think there's a risk that we're going to be challenged by the business, by our leaders, and it's likely to be the last thing to return. I think people's fears are going to be one of the biggest hurdles in coming back to normal, and we do all need to be better at championing what we do, what we love to do. This is our profession. We're also very passionate about it and have put many years into this industry. So I think there is a strong case for us to be the champions for that. And the new normal, I think, will be a better normal. People will want the social interaction. We need the interaction for so many reasons, just for our well-being. So I think by the time we do come back to it, people will be ready. And businesses will be looking to us to lead that. Venues are going to want to showcase how far they've come, how far they've listened, how the changes that they've made during the pandemic, to encourage them to return to us. And I think we will adapt, businesses will adapt, and we will bounce back. We will get through it.
Right. Thank you, Anna. I won't ask if anyone's got any immediate questions there, because I think it is best to look at the three sort of areas that we're talking about and then opening up to conversation. But as I said earlier, it's great. Please fire any thoughts or questions you have into the chat space, because we can pick those up afterwards and make sure that we've got them covered, or if not, add. And I think I've seen a couple already, but just to reiterate, we also don't know the government guidelines and rules. So we're taking a position here on taking the first step to start the thinking and the dialogue between ourselves as what we think it is, and then we'll be updating when we get the government guidelines. This is an ongoing exercise between us all. Mark, I think you're going to be up next. Do you want to share your screen, Mark, or do you want me to share?
You can share, just flick to the supplier tab on there, Richard.
I'm trying to find it.
And I think just while you're opening that up, I would say that you know, Christopher, Anna and I, we all worked in our separate groups, and I think what's going to come through is that some of the same things come up, whether we were looking just at kind of pre-event, whether we were looking at the supplier section, whether we're looking at the on-site. So you know, you might see some of the same things coming up in each of the lists, but it's just, you know, we're all professional planners and we're all thinking about this really from kind of start to finish. So looking specifically on suppliers, and really we were looking and thinking about venues. The first thing I would say, two general points there around budgeting. Think about the fact that your budget is likely to increase because you're going to need to take into account renting a larger space to allow for social distancing, and really work with the venue to see what they can do there. And also additional equipment, highly likely that you're going to need to have masks, gloves, sanitizers, a hybrid option as well. So likely that your event budget is going to increase. We then looked at health and safety protocols. I'm not going to go through everything in real detail there because it's on the list, but be thinking about, when you're talking to venues, things like face coverings. Is it the venue policy to have them, or would you as the organizer like to give them out as people arrive if they don't have them? Sanitizer stations, do the venues have them? The venue staffing, what's their policy if an employee has symptoms of the virus, and do they have contingency in place should any of their employees be unable to attend? What's their medical policy? What happens if a delegate is sick with symptoms on site? Where is that person directed to? Do you have to inform other delegates? The thermal reading policy, again, is that something that the venue are going to insist on everyone having their temperature checked? And does the venue have a doctor or a nurse on site? The good news is that most of, in fact, all of the venues that we talk to through this process, they have they have a plan, and so there's some examples which we've included there of things that the venues are doing. But certainly for me, it would be the first thing that I'd be asking if I was going out to a venue: what is their new policy for COVID-19? And I'd expect any venue to be able to give me some examples of what they were going to put in place. When you're thinking about venue contracting, be talking to the venues about what happens in the event of postponement or cancellation or rental of larger meeting spaces if you have to increase or decrease. Again, delegate attrition, if your numbers suddenly drop, and then set up and breakdown times if you need to have space for a longer time for the setup and breakdown. So engage with the supplier nice and early so that you can just talk through all of that. And then once you get into the event space planning, which if you just scroll down a bit more on that, there we go. Be thinking about conference room capacities because it's going to be subject to social distancing. what other events are happening in the venue at the same time? Do you need to take that venue exclusively? Do you need to have your own bathrooms for your group, or is it shared with others? The venue layout, signage. Again, we touched on venue staffing, so we don't need to cover that again. Registration. What's going to happen there? Will the venue screen off registration? Is there an option for on-demand badging through the venue, which would obviously need less space than a large desk with all the badges laid out? Also be thinking about the fact that your registration staff may need to socially distance. Cloakrooms, how is that going to work? Delegate access in and out, can you have your own entrance? Be thinking about access then for your suppliers, anybody who's bringing things into the venue, how many people can be using loading lifts, make sure that all of your suppliers are aware of the policy for the venue. Again, thinking about social distancing and who is responsible. Is it you as the events team are responsible for reminding guests to socially distance, or will the venue have staff to look after that? And then things like guest flow. So like we say, can you have your own entrance? Can you have your own exit? Are the venue going to have floor markings? And probably really crucially, when you're talking to venues, what's their virtual capability? You know, it's highly likely that you'll need to have some kind of either a hybrid event or just an option to take part of it virtual. Have they got the right bandwidth to be able to host that sort of virtual element? Talking to suppliers again, catering. What's going to happen with the format for your catering breaks? Are you going to need to provide box lunches? How are the venue going to help you to manage any queuing and social distancing? Obviously now you've got to think about, you know, do you have to have all cutlery individually wrapped? That's not great from a sustainability point, but you might have to make a choice there. Again, around materials, lots of the venues would provide pads and pens. Do you ask guests to bring their own if they want them? Obviously that's more sustainable. And what about hygiene and how the venues are going to cope with that? Gifts and giveaways as well. You know, it could be that you can't do those anymore. Again, do they have to be individually wrapped, or do you want to just avoid that altogether? We looked as well at production and AV. So contactless microphones. How many microphones do you need? You can't really pass microphones around anymore, so are you going to need to have a point where people can go if they want to ask questions? Staging, more space needed in the room. You may not need a stage if you've got people socially distanced, or you may need a bigger screen because you might have people that are further back. Just things to think about. We touched then on Q&A. Do you look at things like Slido, if people are comfortable with that? And then announcements. Do you need to continue to make announcements through the day as part of your conference to remind people to socially distance and clean their hands? And then again, some considerations for all partner suppliers. So as we touched on with the venue staff, what's the policy if you have an AV company that you're working with? Again, what's their policy? We don't want staff coming in if they're not well. So do they offer sick pay? Do they offer a contingency? If you're talking to suppliers that are coming in, do they need additional time to set up? And then as partner suppliers, do they have their own policies around face coverings and hand sanitizers? And then finally, if people are bringing equipment and kit into a venue, who is responsible for any kind of final clean of that equipment? Is it the venue? Is it the partner supplier? And making sure that's all been signed off. So lots to think about. Oh, I think you've muted, Richard.
Thank you. Sorry. Yeah, thanks, Mark. Thanks a lot for that. Okay, so Christopher, yeah?
If we go on to on-site checklist.
On-site checklist, great. Thank you.
As Mark was saying, there is definitely going to be lapovers between the lists where we're considering the same thing in each area, and it's very important as well that we check at each point as well that these things are being taken into place. So my area and my group was on site. So first of all, we're talking through again that health verification. So we don't know what that's going to look like yet. So that could be a contactless thermometer check. That could be a declaration of health. They would both be done in cooperation between the event organizer and the venue. Then we go into what would happen to fail on-site testing. Again, those delegates could be centrally based close to the venue. They might be further away. So it's a case of how do we help those delegates who are under our care get back. Queues, we would be looking at the moment 2 metre distancing, hopefully after today's announcement going down to 1 metre. We'd want those possibly going outside, and they would also need to think about how those are going to be marked up as well. The delegates being offered individual sterile wipes or small bottles of hand sanitizer. So as well as the large pump ones that you'd expect to see dotted around the venue, those will give delegates sort of the confidence that you're thinking about them as well. We'd also be offering perhaps delegates a free mask on entry. Again, it might not be mandatory, but it's about those delegates making themselves feel as safe and comfortable as they can. We'd be looking at recording lists of attendees. We would look at probably keeping those for up to 28 days after the event. These are all types of things that need to be included in joining instructions as well as GDPR, just to make sure everybody knows how long we're keeping information for. When you're on site, as Anna was mentioning about the high touch items, you'd be making sure they'd be removed. So again, it's all probably more time that you need when you arrive on site to go around and make sure those things are happening. Social distancing on site. So when you're speaking to the venue on-site team, you'd be reconfirming final guest numbers to them, just to make sure they hadn't gone up exponentially. Also as well, when looking at final numbers, just remember that if a room takes 50 people, those 50 people will have to include the venue staff as well. So the social distancing is going to have to take into account people from the venue that are working as well. So that will possibly have effect on your final numbers. Maximum room capacity at the moment would be 4 square meters per person if it's 2 meters squared.
Sorry, Christopher, but we're working on the context that this will be reduced to 1 meter.
This will be reduced to 1 meter.
Yeah,
that's correct. On site as well, you're going to be reconfirming your entry and exit flows. You're going to be reconfirming on-site cleaning, including bathrooms. Will that bathroom possibly have an attendant on site just to make sure they don't get too mixed up with people? You'd be looking at anything, if people were purchasing things from any on-site shops, they would be contactless. And you'd also be working around how many people would be allowed in lifts as well at the time. And then very quickly, the last one is the exhibitor checklist.
Okay. So there's me jumping in. 2 meters square is 1 meter distance, isn't it? Of course. Yeah.
Exhibitors and sponsors on site for when you have those as well. So you'd be looking at the venue to have a specific location for event deliveries, separate from other in-house usual event deliveries so that social distancing can be maintained. Event porters to pre-allocated to the event with dedicated time slots for moving things around. All exhibitors, sponsors and third parties would be talking through risk assessments to make sure everybody's aware of that. We'd be looking at checklists with both agreeable to the venue and the event organizer. Exhibitors and sponsors, would you be requiring to wear face masks and gloves as they moved everything around? The actual exhibit area, as I said, 2 meter distance currently between each exhibitor stand. That will look like being reduced to 1 meter following today's announcements, if that happens. If visitors' tables are in place, would you have a glass screen between them and the visitor? You'd have a clear one-way system to provide social distance markings in the exhibit area. You'd want the area particularly fresh and clean because of the amount of footfall going through, adequate signage. Then again, we go through the sort of hand sanitizers, how many people. Something that is going to drastically change is sponsors and exhibitors not giving out brochures or physical items. So you'd be looking at how would you manage that? How do you take details from people and mail things afterwards? Sponsors and exhibitors, you'd be looking at 10-minute appointments with a buffer time in between as well. And then you'd be avoiding things like business cards. You'd look at timings, especially around lunch, when it's going to be the busy time. Then you'd also be thinking about walking people manning the stands, so swapping in and out on the day would not necessarily be permitted or be as easy as it was before. One huge difference it's going to make with venues and also event organisers is audio-visual equipment booked for the venue. So everything's going to need to be cleaned thoroughly, as that's going to be equipment that's going to be passed from person to person. And again, making friends with everybody so that you've got event porters to be able to help you move things easily around the building at your allotted times as well.
Oh. Okay, so thank you, Christopher. Lots of questions jump to my mind immediately on this, that there's a hell of a lot to do. I think events are going to take longer to organise because we've now got a much overriding importance on responsibility and accountability for ourselves and on behalf of the businesses that you guys all work for. So I think you need to manage expectations up the stream on that. There's a lot of questions here. We're raising a lot of questions for discussion and everything else. Going forward, are we going to see recommendations out of these questions? So the work, if you're looking at the work you're doing, Christopher, you pulled this together, but then there is a lot of questions that we're saying to you, you need to think of this, you need to think of that. Should we or would we turn these into recommendations to people?
Yeah, I mean, it's going to be a constant. It's going to be a constantly evolving document, and it's all going to be very dependent on how people use it as well. So do they use them all together? Do they use them in silos? I think the recommendations are really going to come once we have more clarity from the government, especially about those social distancing guidelines. So just knocking that down from 2 meters to 1 meter would have an effect on probably quite a lot of what we've done already. So I would see once we have got that clarity, I can definitely see recommendations coming out of that.
Yeah, and I think once we engage with the industry, but if we sort of say that that's the objective here, but it's a very good starting point. So as we said, these documents will be posted on the website, hopefully later today, tomorrow. We'll email everybody to let them know that they're there so that you can go download them, take them, comment on them, because the more input we get from everybody, the better the collaborative approach would be. Yeah, Anthony, I see you asking for those, so we'll let you know when they're posted. So does anybody want to ask any questions to the working group or have a discussion on anything?
Richard, can I just jump in with the post-event? And about what we do post-event. So I did pre-event, so it looks like I'm topping and tailing today. But there's the post-event for any sort of comms that we would send out after the event that people would have to declare if they've had any symptoms, X amount of days following the event. And then there's also the declaration and how we then report that to the venue as well if any of our delegates do fall ill. I think that's something that we will need to add to the document. I can add it on, maybe just rename mine sort of, pre and post event, but that's certainly a consideration that just because you got through the event fine, if anything should happen after, we still have that duty of care and responsibility.
Yeah, I think we'll probably have some level of accountability for that because if the government are trying to do track and trace and everything else, if someone has been taken ill or if someone is ill having been at an event, whether that does work through the track and trace system, but I think we're going to be responsible to report that.
Yeah, totally.
That will come out.
And it might even be in the T's and C's. I suspect that they might put some sort of caveat in our contracts going forward that would actually, you know, would say that.
Yeah, because that works both ways, wouldn't it? Like, same with the venue. If a venue is then aware that a member of staff, let's say post your event, so there's pre your event, post your event, if a member of staff is taken ill, what happens at the venue?
Yeah.
Are government going to be shutting a place down for a clean and a total check? So you could lose your venue for 48 hours, or are they going to be able to carry on working and do a major clean through?
Yeah.
Okay, so again, looking for any questions, any comments? Can't see anything coming through. So, okay, so before we wrap up, Chris, Mark, Anna, anything else to add?
No, I mean, it's been a pleasure working with Mark and Anna on this. And thank you very much as well to the volunteers as well that have joined our working groups as well. We couldn't have done it without anybody. Thank you to everybody for sharing all the information as well. One of the big parts of this as well was literally just going through all the reams and reams of information from venues and suppliers and everything above the work that they're starting on. Yeah, just a huge thank you to everybody who's either shared something or contributed something and helped us so much.
Yeah. Thanks, Donna. Just checking some of the questions coming in. Everyone said, now there is a lot there. You know, just taking it in for the first time is quite daunting. But as I said, we'll circulate these. We'll get them on the website. Please treat them with confidentiality. Don't go sharing them with venues or suppliers or anything at the moment. Yes, you can use them for discussing internally, because we've still got quite a lot of work to do on them before we take them out to the industry. Donna, I'm not sure if you were on the call right from the beginning, but I did mention the working group that you're heading up, the Black Lives Matter. Do you want to do a quick note on that or anything?
Hi, I don't know if everyone can see me and hear me. Yeah, thank you very much. I am heading up a working group that will be trying to pull together some salient points to help drive change within the corporate event sector and our sector to help boost the diversity and inclusion for ethnic minority groups within the events industry. So anybody who is interested in contributing to that, or if you have any points that you think should be addressed, then feel free to obviously contact the info at, I think will be address, or the chair address for EMEA.
Yeah, send it to me and I'll forward it to you.
Yeah, that'd be great. Thank you so much.
Okay, guys, and yeah, we'll be in touch. Thank you very much, everybody.
Thanks all.
Thanks, guys. Speak soon.
Thank you. Thank you.